When you rent a home, one of the first things you'll come across is a residential lease agreement. It's the contract between the landlord and tenant that lays out all of the key terms of the rental. In this video, we'll walk through what should be included in the agreement, how lease termination works, the most important clauses, and the disclosures you'll need to know about. Let's get started. At eForms, we make creating legal documents simple. Our templates are always up to date with the state's latest requirements. If you're ready to put together a compliant residential lease agreement, click the link in the description to get started. Let's cover what is a lease agreement. A lease agreement is between two main parties, the landlord who owns the property and the tenant who rents or lives in it. Sometimes the landlord might have someone else represent them, like an agent. The landlord's responsibility is to make sure the property is safe and livable for the tenant, and they're also in charge of general maintenance. This usually includes things like fixing appliances, regular maintenance of the air conditioner and heating system, electricity and water, and ensuring the property is clean by the time the tenant moves in. On the other hand, a tenant also has responsibilities such as paying rent, keeping the lease properly safe and sanitary, and properly using all electrical, plumbing, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and other facilities and appliances. The tenant is also expected to make minor repairs and return the leased property in good condition with the exception of ordinary wear and tear. What are the requirements for a valid residential lease agreement? Requirements may vary from state to state. We have videos explaining each state's rules on our website, but generally a residential lease agreement needs to be in writing if the lease term is more than 1 year, be signed by the parties, include a description of the leased property, include any required disclosures required by law. Another important factor in a lease agreement is its term. A residential lease usually has a fixed term of 1 year. Now let's cover terminating a residential lease agreement. In general, a landlord is allowed to terminate in the following situations. The tenant fails to pay rent. The tenant violates any term or clause stipulated in the lease agreement, or the tenant infringes an obligation imposed by law. To terminate a lease agreement, a landlord usually needs to notify the tenant with a notice to quit. The name and requirements of the notice vary in each state, so check out our other videos for your state specifically. A tenant also has the option to terminate a lease agreement when the landlord fails to maintain habitable premises, the tenant is an active duty military member, or the tenant is a victim of domestic violence. If the tenant and landlord decide to allow for the termination of the agreement with a specified notice period, it can be done by either party with or without a fee. If a fee is required, it's typically equal to 1 month's rent. This section can be entirely negotiated between the landlord and the tenant, as there are no state laws or requirements that restrict this section. Now, let's go over rent payments. Landlords are usually allowed to ask tenants for a security deposit. This money is set aside in a special account and is meant to cover things like unpaid rent or damage beyond normal wear and tear. When the lease ends, the landlord has to return the deposit minus any deductions within a certain time frame, which is often around 30 days. The exact rules, including how long a landlord has to return the deposit, can vary by state, so it's always a good idea to check local laws or speak with an attorney if you're unsure. Can you be evicted before the end of a lease agreement? The landlord must have reasons to evict a tenant. For example, a violation made by the tenant or non-compliance to the lease agreement. Remember, not every tenant is required to sign the agreement, but a landlord normally requires that everyone occupying the leased property be named on the lease agreement as a tenant or as an occupant. Before we go, let's cover disclosures and warranties. For homes built before 1978, federal law requires landlords to disclose whether lead-based paint is present. Back then, it was common for paint to contain lead, but we know now that lead exposure can be especially harmful to children and their development. On top of that, every residential lease agreement includes what's called an implied warranty, which basically means the property must be safe, livable, and suitable for people to live in. And that's it. You're now up to speed on what you need to know to get started with a residential lease agreement. If you're ready to put one together, click the link in the description below for our easy-to-use state-by-state templates. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.